no bedside table. I tried to sleep, but I wasn't able. Now
Good day, everyone. This is Don Smith. I am a Sony Artisan and a Stingray ambassador, and I have been using my new Sony a7R5 camera since last month when I was in Iceland co-teaching a workshop with a fellow artisan, Gary Hart. And I just basically fell in love with this camera. And it gave me a good time to kind of work all the kinks out and get more familiarized with the menu settings. And if you're a Sony user and you either own this camera or you are thinking of purchasing this camera, I would highly recommend it. It is, the one thing I hear about this camera, well, it's the same sensor as the a7R4. That's true, but it's a brand new processor. And having spoken to our engineering team, there's just new wiring, there's new components, and all of this goes into how well this camera performs, the quality of the image, which is spectacular. And I've been using it at night lately. We shot Northern Lights. I've shot here locally where I live in California at my home. And I can tell you it's really, really nice. It's still not my go-to camera at night. That would still be the Sony a7S III. But I can tell you, when I traveled this, and I'm going to be leaving for Norway next week, this is the camera I will take to shoot my Northern Lights. Up to ISO 6400, it performs very well. You can go up to 12,800. And with noise reduction software, you can even shoot there. So there you go, my advice on that. So today, what I would like to do is I'm just going to show you how I've set up my camera for landscape photography. This is still imagery. I am not going to delve into movie settings on this recording. I don't, even though I do periodically shoot video, I don't consider myself an expert in videos, so I want to just refine this into my settings for still photography. So let's, without further ado, I want to point out something with this camera. This is the last of all the redos of the Sony current lineup now that has gone to the new menu settings. I believe the A7C, which is the kind of the small, compact, full-frame camera that I'm hoping to get my hands on, is still the only one that doesn't have this new menu system. But as far as the top of the line and the Pro category cameras, this was the last one to be updated. So if you can look over to the top right, you see that there's 57 pages of menus. So it's quite, these cameras nowadays, and it's not just Sony, it's everybody. They're high sophisticated still cameras combined with high sophistication video cameras. So to put all of that into one camera, you can see there's 57 pages of menu items over there. And I know from teaching workshops, this frustrates people. And I really think Sony has taken a huge step forward in organizing their menu system. Is it the best of all the major cameras? I don't know. I see everybody else's cameras when I teach workshops, and we eventually get to where we need to go. And that's why I want to start out with my menu settings, which is on the top left. When you push your menu button, you're going to see the star, and then underneath it, there's a darker gray, and then you go right on down the line to that little yellowish suitcase down there. We're going to walk you through all of these. But for starters, I want to show you what my menu setting is. This is just another way that I can add items that I go into all the time. And when I'm going to show you how to add them, really, it's really simple. You just push on the My Menu setting, and To get anywhere in these Sony menus, you can now touch them if you have touchscreen open. I just use the back toggle, the wheel on the back. You can go up, down, left, right, and then when you find what you want, you just push in on the button, and that sets it. So I'm going to push the right-hand side of my wheel. I'm going to come over to Add Item, and I'm going to push in on that button. And now I can go through. If I scroll down, you can see I have to go through. I'm on page 1 of 50 now. So I would have to go through until I found what I wanted. Let's say I wanted, let's find something here. Let's say I want Pixel Shoot to appear. I'm going to back that up because I actually do. So I'm going to hit, or I'm going to push in on the button to add that. Now you look, you get 7 items over there on the right on my first page, but if I'm going to add it to my menu too. I push that button again, it tells me it's been added. So now let me back out of here, and I'm going to come all the way back up to, oops, this is still, I got to go one more screen back. And now let me get out of this by hitting the left side of the wheel. You see I have a couple of menus. That's because if you come down the right side and you count, you only get to do 7 ads per menu. And I think we saw on that other screen there's something like 6 or 7 menus, so that's quite a bit they're allowing you to add. So where did the pixel shift go? Well, it went into menu 2. And I just doing that again by clicking on the bottom of the wheel on the back of my camera. Now, I can also come back in here to my menu settings at any time. I can come in here, I can sort items, I can delete items. Hey, I can take a whole menu page out of there, or I can blow it all up and take all my menus out of there. So that's how we do that, okay? So now, let's come down and really get started on here. And that is my camera icon right here. Now, one thing I really like is they added this main page this time. I just pretty much leave this by default. Okay, let's come down to the red camera icon, and this is where we really get into all our settings. So I'm going to, again, I won't tell this all the time, but to move to the right side of the toggle wheel on the back, the little wheel, not the toggle wheel. And what I want to do is I want to come over, I'm going to click the right side again. So my JPEG high energy efficient function switch is set for JPEG. That's just because most software out there cannot read these, what I just call HEIF files as of yet. But if you don't know what that file is, that's proprietary to Sony. You will see it in some of the cameras like I believe Apple iPhones call theirs HEIC, H-E-I-C. These are containers, and what they do when you're pushing the button, it's actually recording, like in movie mode, 8 to 10 frames, as I understand it, and then the software is picking kind of the best of the shadows, midtones, and highlights, so you get a really cool looking shot. You can always leave it in this mode, this HEIF mode, and then you can convert out to JPEG when you go to add it to the web. But if you're going to add it to the web right out of camera, you'd have to check with each page you're loading if they will recognize a HEIF file. Okay, image quality settings. You're going to see it's 1+2, and I'm going to push in on that. 1+2 is because we have 2 slots, which is awesome. Well, you can set this up however you want. I know some people will set it up where slot 1 is their still camera, slot 2 is all their video recordings. I think of this more as backup. And experience has taught me cards can and will go down. And how would you just like to shoot a shot of your lifetime and you risk it to putting on one card and then you get that error message on the card and you can't save it? So I just have everything set up to write simultaneous to both of my cards. And because I'm landscape, I shoot RAW mode for everything. When I'm in RAW, I cannot get the JPEG quality nor the JPEG size, which I don't care about. Whoops. Let me come out of that and see if I can get down to my media. Record media settings. If I push in on that, you can see this is where I set simultaneous recording, or you can set up your slots individually. Okay. Simultaneous recording for movies. I want everything that I shoot to be copied onto both of those cards equally. Image quality settings, if I push in on that, it just takes me back to that page. Okay, so aspect ratio, I always leave mine at 3:2, which is standard for this camera, but you can have choices. I know some people like to shoot in that 4:3. Some like to shoot 16:9 or 1:1. I do all that cropping at the computer is the way I think about it. File format, I said we're not going over these movie settings. That's, I would recommend, actually I'd recommend a couple of people, one in particular, Drew Geraci, Geraci, I believe is how Drew spells his name. I know he puts out regular, Drew's a Sony Artisan. You have seen his work, whether you know it or not. If you were House of Cards fans, a lot of TV shows, he's filmed the whole intro for House of Cards. That's all his work. West Side Story with Steven Spielberg. He shot a lot of the exterior shots, and Drew shares his knowledge incredibly. And I highly recommend you go onto his site. I know another artisan, Chris Burkhart, but I'm not so sure Chris does anything in video, and he is a busy guy. I only live a half hour drive away from Chris. I'm in Morro Bay, California, and he's down the coast a little bit from me, and I never get to see him. He's always on between his travel schedule, my travel schedule. But those are two guys I would send you to. Oh, and another one. I'm going to send you to a third artisan, Patrick Murphy Racy. Patrick does a lot of incredible videos, very willing to share his knowledge. Let's move along. ASPC. This now, what I set this up as is I set it up in as a my menu, and you get three choices here: on, off, or auto. So that's how I access this. I never use auto. I only use on or off. The other night I was out shooting Venus and Pluto, the conjunction, and I wanted a crop in camera. So the key to remember on this, you guys, is that it's not giving you, it's a 1.5 crop, but it's not, it's just basically cropping the file you have. So you're going to see it blow up in your viewfinder, and you're going to go, oh, wow, I just, increased my reach by 1.5x. But it's not an optical punch-in. It is just cropping, similar to what you can do on your own at the computer. So you would say, well, why would I want to use it? Well, personally, I like to use it because I like to see what's going on around the edges of my frame, and I like to get my cropping as I want it in camera. You got to remember, you're shooting with a 61 meg camera, so to punch in 1.5, you're still getting a beefy file. I wouldn't worry about it. In fact, I don't. That's why I punch it on when I need it, and that's the reasoning I use it. Long exposure noise reduction. Yes, I use this, and the camera will automatically come on to write what they call a dark frame. And I believe it kicks in somewhere, if I remember correctly, after 1 second. And the reason being is as we're doing, let's say I'm doing a 20-second exposure at night, I'm sending a lot of current to the backside sensor, and that heats up. And when you heat up a sensor, that creates noise. So you can see, I've run tests with this where I turn that off and then just run the picture through a noise reduction like Topaz denoise or On1 Prime denoise. But I like leaving it on and let the camera map. What it does, it'll take a black frame and it'll look for any hot pixels, and it will fill it in and try to get the noise down, and then I will still run it through noise reduction. So long way around saying I would just leave this on all the time. Same with high ISO noise reduction, although I've got it at normal, which, you only get 2 settings, normal and low, and I just leave mine at normal, but it's on all the time. Color space, Adobe RGB. I know some people want to kick into sRGB. And if you are shooting where you're going to upload right off the camera to the website from your camera or your smartphone, yes, definitely go to sRGB. But all of mine, I want to capture Adobe RGB as a wider color gamut, so I want to capture it. And then when I go to the web, I will convert it to sRGB for the web. Lens compensation, I just leave everything in auto. This is shading, chromatic aberration, and distortion comp. It tries to figure out any distortion that's going on. Chromatic aberration is those lines that you can sometimes see on the outlines of like mountains and stuff when you're shooting out towards a vibrant sky. And shading is basically vignetting. Leave them all on auto. This camera does a fantastic job. All right, whoops. I went, like I said, every once in a while I'll punch through something. We're going to drop down to media. That's where your format is. And I add that as a My Menu item. The other ones are I don't touch. I just don't see any use for them in what I'm doing. However, there you can see recover image database. So if you do lose, if you are having a problem with the card, I would go there. File, I don't use, well, I do use something here. Let me go back and come down. I punch in here, on copyright info, and I've got my copyright on. And let me see if I can show you. Yep, there's my name. Set copyright, yes. So when basically display copyright, yes. When my files are loaded on the computer, it's one less thing I have to do in adding my copyright in. It already has been recorded on the raw file that I'm sending in there. Shooting mode. This is where you can go in and you can set up, let's say you want your number 1 setting to be all your still settings. So you can go into still mode. Number 2 could be video mode. Number 3 could be something else. I never play with these. I tried them. To me, I just spend more time messing around with them. But having said that, I've talked to a lot of pros that absolutely love this. So, it's up to you. That's a personal choice. Drive mode, let's go in and punch in. You can see now this is where I can get to my drive mode. This is also a My Menu setting. Bracket settings, very important if you're going to do any type of HDR and you're doing it in auto mode, and I'll explain that in a moment. This is where you would go into. I shoot manual mode all the time for landscape. So when I'm bracketing, I'm just changing the shutter. You never want to change the aperture when you're shooting landscape because that will affect your depth of field. So bracket order, here's where you can play how you want your brackets to go. So why does this matter if you're let's say if you're in an auto mode, let's say you're in a shutter or an aperture or even program, that camera's got to know, okay, I'm going to take the example of shutter priority. You can go in and you can actually change the order of how you want these to record. Here's an important one. Focus bracket settings, and I'm going to go through these now. I say we were going to come back to them, but we're not. We'll do it now. On just below your main dial on the top of your camera, you're going to see 3 icons: a still camera, a movie camera, and then the simple and quick settings. You are going to want to be on the still camera setting. Let me come into here. Self-timer during brackets, you can see I've taken my 2-second timer and done that. I leave the bracket settings alone, the bracket order alone, and then the bracket settings, Here's where I go in, and I've done a lot of testing on this, and I have to give a shout out to a great photographer from the Netherlands named Albert Dross, D-R-O-S. Check out Albert, awesome shooter. Albert was our guide in Iceland, and we spent 3 weeks together doing 2 back-to-back workshops. And he is a Sony, basically similar to a Sony Artisan in Europe. And so he was testing this camera and already knew how to do the bracketing. So he helped me out quite a bit. He did not know what exposure smoothing was, and I couldn't figure it out. So I called one of our Sony techs, Johnny Pham, great guy. And what this is, if you're shooting where it's you're kind of in shade and part of your frame's in sunlight, as it's bracketing, the camera will try to do its best to control that if you were to turn that on. Again, because I'm manual mode, I just leave it off. The shooting interval, I leave mine on the shortest. You can see if I don't know how to think about this, possibly if you're doing something at night and you wanted to do something longer, like interval shooting, stuff like that, that's where you'd go to change it. I just leave mine on shortest because the way I think about it is I'm doing near-far relationships a lot of times with like my 12 to 24 lens. And then the focus bracketing destination, the way I do anything, be it focus bracketing, panoramas, HDR, I do it on the card I'm shooting on. Well, if you push in on this, you're going to see that you can create a new folder. But from what I'm hearing, I haven't tested this myself, but from what I'm hearing from my fellow colleagues is that if you use a current folder, it will set up these separate folders for your focus brackets, but it resets your numbering to 0 or to frame 1 again. So I always reset everything when I'm shooting. And they said that it's been confusing them, because if they were to dump it into their normal shoot, now you're going to have a software conflict because it's going to see 2 number 1s, 2 number 2s, 2 number 3s. So basically, when you're processing, if you want to put it into its own folder, do that and then just work on the processing out of the folder for that one image and then add it into your normal shoot. I hope that makes sense. I wish Sony would give us a way to change the numbering on that, but because I've always trained myself to I put my hand in front of my lens, I click a frame, then I go through whatever I'm doing, focus bracketing, HDR, panorama, and when I get to that last frame, I put my hand in front of my lens and I shoot it again. And that if I don't get to the edit till a month later, that tells me, hey, pay attention, you've done one of those 3 things. So that's what that's all about. Here's where you get to your intravolometer. You can see I've got mine set for off right now, and that's where you can go in and set whatever you want as far as your start time, your interval shooting. I wish I had this camera when I worked with the San Jose Sharks as their team photographer, because there were times we would have the arena set up for ice and we wanted to convert it over to basketball. The Warriors would come in and play. And I would have loved to have had this set up in the rafters and set all this up and just walk away and let it shoot. That would have been pretty cool. Okay, pixel shift. I've used this. It works great. Give it a try. This is where you'd go in and turn it on. The only thing to remember, gang, if you're doing pixel shift, you are going to need the Sony Imaging Edge software. It is a free download from Sony. That's the only program. Your Lightroom or anything else will not put these images together. So you have to do that through Imaging Edge software. All right. Here's where you would come in to do your silent shutter. I can go over these. I turn mine off, but if I was indoors or I'm shooting an animal and I didn't want to disturb them, I would go in and turn that off. Shutter type, I just shoot mechanical shutter. you can put it into electronic shutter because then you get all those intermediate shutter speeds. I think I get it in mechanical on this too. E front curtain, that's if you're using flash. Release without a lens, I enable, but do know when it trips, if you don't have a lens on, you're exposing that camera to dust. Release without a card, I leave enable. This is a big one. I probably really should turn that off. I think I'm going to turn that off as I'm thinking about it, because you could do a shoot and have forgotten to put your cards in. I had that on for a reason, so I'm going to go back. But that's where you would do that. I'll let you figure that one out. Anti-flicker set. If you're one that does, let's say, event photographies, and you're shooting indoors like a high school gym or a college gym, or you're shooting an outdoor event like, let's say, a concert or a rodeo, sometimes you'll with sodium vapor lights, there's an ebb and flow to these lights, so they peak. And if you catch, if you're shooting through a sequence, let's say a baseball batter, and you're shooting at 10 frames a second, every frame is going to come out. The color balance is going to be a little bit different depending on where you hit the ebb and flow of that sodium vapor. And most of these stadiums, that's what they're lit with. Variable shutter, I just leave mine off. Okay. Let's come back over to image stabilization, steady shot, turn that baby on. I just leave steady shot, manual adjustment, and the focal length, I don't have to go in and change that every time. This is just a default setting. You can set it if you're shooting a specific scene, like the other night when I was shooting those 2 stars. I really should have went in and set that to the 600 mil, which I was shooting. But it doesn't, if you don't have that set, by no means is it going to affect the performance basically on any of these lenses. Okay, let's come out now to zoom. I turned this off. Well, I don't have a lens on my camera because I don't have one on this morning, and I need one to do that. But I just leave everything in the default settings of the camera. My shooting display, I do turn this on, and you can see that I set up rule of thirds. Very interesting. I was watching a video from a highly regarded landscape photographer who I've gotten to know a little bit over in Scotland. In fact, I'll mention his name because he does an incredible YouTube series called Expressive Photography. Really good. Check him out. His name's Alistair Ben, Alister, Ben. Great photographer over there. I'm going to mention one other guy who was our guide on our Scotland workshop, Alex Trotsky, Trowski. Give a shout out to both those guys. Alex was our guide, and Alistair was the one who recommended Alex to us. He just did a recent video on rule of thirds. He doesn't like that because he's not a rule-bound guy. I get it. I'm not either. But I do like having the rule of thirds on, the grid line on, and that's where I would go there. You can place it in a square grid, a diagonal square grid. I just like, it helps me to think about where I want to put the alignment, or to remind me where I may want to put some of the alignment of some of my elements. I'm pretty much a feel photographer, but to try to teach somebody feel is impossible. I can teach rule of thirds to get somebody going, but if you're an advanced photographer, you know that you just get to a point where you can start feeling everything. Okay, let's come back down. I think now we've gone through everything. So now we're going to come down to the next icon, exposure color. And if you go to exposure, this is the cool thing, guys. They added in this new on this camera. And you can come down and, bulb is always 30 seconds. It's always been 30 seconds. And we've been lobbying our engineers to, hey, these are mirrorless cameras. Why can't we control it? So now when you punch in, look at this. I can set this up to as high as 999 seconds. I'm going to forget to come in here and reset this. So anyway, trust me, you can go up to... So when you're doing night photography, any type of timed photography, That's you don't need a cable release anymore. You forgot your cable release and you're, oh man, I want to shoot 15-second exposures in night sky. Just come right in there and set it. Here's where you would come in and set your ISO. Base ISO for this camera, that means where you're going to get your cleanest frames, is ISO 100. And then I always go into this range limit and I expand that where I can go ISO 50 to 102,400, which I would never recommend using. But the main reason I do it is if I forget to take my neutral densities out and I'm in an area where I want to blur water and I've got maybe it's early in the morning, nice shaded light, it might be at dawn, I'll drop my camera down to ISO 50 just to extend my shutter drag time where I can get out to maybe a second or two to get some motion in that water. ISO auto minimum, I just leave that alone at standard. Exposure comp, I don't use any of this. The exposure compensation dial, I just use it on, it's the dial to the right of what is your, I think it's by default your shutter dial on the top right of your camera. It's the furthest right dial you see there. And it confused me when I first got this camera because there's no markings on it, similar to the Sony A1. And had to ask Albert, is this my exposure compensation dial? And yes, it was. So don't get confused with that. Metering mode, here's where you can come in and change all of those settings. It's going to take it, it's going to set those. I do this through my, I think I have it set up as a My Menu, and it's also in my function button when I press that. So I don't worry so much about that. Here's where I changed my shutter to, no, I don't. This is something I'm confusing with something else. Just scratch that. So this one, just leave alone. Flash, I don't use flash anymore. I used to use it a lot when I was doing sports and corporate work. I don't own a flash anymore, which is really weird for me. White balance, again, this is just something that I do on the back of my camera through the function button. Color and tone, this is only, I would turn that on if you're shooting JPEG only, the D range optimizer. Just turn that on. Then you can go in and set your creative looks. Here's where you'd get in if you are a video person and set your picture profile. I just leave all of those I just leave the D range on, but like I said, I'd never really shoot in just JPEG only. You got to remember that when you shoot the camera, even if you're just raw mode, what you see on the back of your camera is always a in-camera processed JPEG. Does that make sense? I hope it does. It's not showing you the raw file. That's why people go, when they open up their RAW, if you're new to RAW and they open it up in Lightroom for the first time, or any program really, they go, oh man, that doesn't look anything like I saw on the back of my camera. No, because you're seeing a processed JPEG on the back of your camera. You still have the raw file. So the creative look is only activated. You cannot use that on RAW files. That's a JPEG thing only. Zebra displays. Yes, this is your highlight alert in Sony technology. So that is always on. And I turn, let me see if I can go back. I turn mine, if I punch in here, I have different settings over there on the left. The one that works best for me is 100. And you'll see that eventually I will set that to red. We haven't gotten there yet. And you do have a choice as to what color you want. I think you get a choice of 3 or 4 colors you can set it to. Okay, let's go to AF/MF. I'm going to go through these rather quickly. My focus mode is always manual. My priority set is balanced emphasis. Priority set, balanced emphasis. AF tracking is 5 responsive. AF illuminator, turn that off. If you're doing anything, let's say you're shooting wildflowers, early morning, dawn, or dusk light on the other end of the day, if the camera can't see quite enough to activate the autofocus, it's going to turn on a light to shine on that. I don't like it, so I turn it off. If you like it and prefer that, again, everything's to taste. You can turn it on. Aperture drive and autofocus, I just leave that default. I never even think about that. Autofocus with shutter. Okay. I turn mine off because I'm going to set mine up back button. Full time. Oh, this one. Yeah, DMF. Turn that one off. With pre-autofocus, I've tried that when I was shooting anything moving. I talked to our resident sports expert, Patrick Murphy-Racy. He's played with it way more than I have. He doesn't use it. So if Patrick says not to use it, I'm going to take that to the bank. And the test I've run where I use it, I don't see any need for me. But test it for yourself. Focus area, I just leave all of these set at whatever the camera defaults to, other than this one, where if I put on my, I have grips for this camera. I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the grips. It's, in Sony lingo, but if you know what I'm talking about, it's where you can put the 2 batteries into the grip and it screws into the bottom of your camera. Awesome if you're not on a tripod. So this is where I would want to turn on my vertical and horizontal switch. So when I go into the vertical mode, there is a shutter button right there for me to push, but I have to actually go in and make sure that is on or set to that. Okay. Focus area color. Here's where I told you we have our choices of color. Well, in this camera, I take it back. We only get red or white. Autofocus registration, I leave off. All of this is just set to off. My area display during tracking, I leave on. AFC area display on. What this is, a circular or circulation of focus point. I want it to circulate. If my focus point is way over to the right and I keep pushing, what it will do, instead of stopping there, it'll come back over onto my left side. And so it kind of like circulates behind, the way I think about it, circulates behind the sensor and it comes back over on the left side. I kind of like that. But again, that's the taste. This other one, autofocus frame, I just leave that standard. I think that's default. Subject recognition, very cool. You want to turn it on. Look at all the different subject recognitions we get in this camera. Animal, bird, animal only, bird only, insect, car, train. I mean, that's pretty cool. And I can tell you, I haven't tested this camera, but I tested the bird eye. This is all on these animals. It's going to check the eye on it. And I did one on animals, on birds, with my A1, and I thought I was missing everything. And when I got those frames up at 30 frames a second, out of probably 1,000 frames, I may have had to throw away 3 or 4. Everything else was tack sharp. It's scary good how this works. So I'm assuming that's the same technology into this camera. Give it a try. I spoke to another artisan who actually tested the insect with a macro lens, and it grabbed right on to whatever insect he was shooting. So it's pretty cool stuff, you guys. The rest of the stuff I pretty much just you can play around however it fits your way of doing things, but I don't really look into any of these other things as helping me. Focus assist. If you're shooting in manual mode and you go to turn it, it's going to punch into the middle of the frame. Focus magnifier, that's just to blow that little red box up. You can do that to taste. Focus magnification time, I leave it at, when I punch in and want to check something for focus, I don't want it going off in 2 or 5 seconds. So I put no limit, and then you just lightly tap your shutter button and it'll go away. I want my initial focus to start just 1 step up. I don't want to jump all the way up to 4.7. But if you do, feel free. Autofocus and magnification, I'm going to turn that one off. I forgot about that, and the other night I wanted to punch in to help out with autofocus, so I am going to turn that guy on. Peaking display, okay, we want that on. We want, this is where I've set this to mid. And peaking color, here's where I get my 4 colors. Okay, so I thought there was 4 colors in here. So the peaking display does have to do, gang, with, what it does, it looks for lines or anything that's creating contrast, and it will put whatever color you want around it. So the other one, I apologize, is for the frame you see in the viewfinder, and that's where you get either red or white. Okay, so I hope I've clarified that for you. And okay, let's punch back out. All right, so that wraps up most of the main settings. I got a few more for you. Playback, you can just, I don't touch anything in here, but you can set that up as you wish. This is, the green button is for all your connections to your smartphone. I don't currently use any of that because it's rare that I'm out on location and I want to shoot something. But let's say, I was just in Iceland and I shot a picture of the Northern Lights. I could go ahead and move that over to my smartphone, and I could have put it out on my social media channel. Look what I'm seeing right now. So that's where you would come into here. Now the suitcase settings, this is obviously where you'd come in and set up your area and date, but typically when you start your camera up, you're doing that anyway. Reset or save settings. There's times when your camera will go out for repair and the tech will have to reset your settings. So if you come over here, whoops, let me go back, and you come into save or load settings, you can actually load your settings onto a card. I never do it because I set these cameras up so often. I'm pretty familiar with everything, and it always helps to refamiliarize myself. So, but say your camera did go down and you had this backed up on a card and now it's on your hard drive, then you drag it back onto a card if your camera came back with everything reset, and you go back in and now you're gonna, I said the first one, load setting, you're saving settings, and then you would come back in here and load settings back into your camera and you're right back up and running. So real cool thing. I should do it. I don't, but again, it's just because I'm doing this for a living and I know these cameras very well. Here's the one I do want to show you. This is going to be part 2 of back button focus. This is a big thing for landscape photographers and sports photographers. So you can see this top one's got a camera icon to the left, custom key dial set. And when I punch in on that, here's what I currently set up. And it's cool now because when you push a number, it comes up a little display and it shows you exactly what button you're doing. Now, this setup is what I call the Sony secret sauce. One of our techs set this up or figured this out for us about 4 years ago, I think when the a7R4 was released. And we couldn't figure out how to get the back button focus. I really wish these camera companies, and I keep asking this, would just put one menu setting that says back button focus and it does everything for you. But here's my settings as per Sony. You're going to set number 1 to AF on. You're going to have to go through and scroll through all those pages until you find it. And then you're going to go to, which looks like on the back of your camera, AF-on button and AF-MF selector hold. So what this is going to allow you to do now, and we've turned that shutter off. The main reason we turned it off, again, as I explained, is for night photography. But now, when you push in on button number 2 on the back of your camera, the AF on, you get autofocus. What does number 1 button do? Well, if you need to take over manual focus, you no longer have to reach over and flick your lens switch into manual. You just tap that button once and you're in manual focus. So push in on that button once you've set these in there, and that's going to be your autofocus. And let's say, well, I want to fine tune it. It didn't quite get this flower in the front that I want in focus. Tap the number 1 button, and now you're in manual focus. How cool is that? I set my number 3 That's, I think by default, focus magnifier. If it's not, that's where I do it. 4 is focus area. That's where I can move around, but I just do it with my toggle switch. The rectangle you set up on the back of your camera. And then this is another cool one that I wish Sony would build a campaign around, because it's great, and especially if you're doing night photography or working under really kind of first light of the day or last light of the day. This is bright monitoring, and I tie it, you can see, to my trash button, which is number 5. And what the best thing I can explain on this is, like, when I'm shooting night and I punch in on bright monitoring, it's like it brightens up almost to daylight. It's not quite daylight, but it makes it virtually impossible to miss focus with, you got bright monitoring and you got your peaking display turned on. If you're one that, struggles to get focus at night, you'll no longer struggle to get focus at night, I guarantee. Okay, these are your custom settings for video, custom key settings. Let me see if I got anything on. Now, this is where you can just move around the camera and set up these buttons to do anything you want. Here's your FN menu settings. You can see how I got mine set up right now. This is where you'd go in to change those. I don't use any. I do use one. I should, and I'm gonna add this to my menu. When I record video, I want that on because I want to be able to record video with my shutter button. That's just my personal thing. Okay, custom key dial sets. This is where you'd go in and change those buttons to, I just leave it at default, where I think the shutter button is my front button just in front of my shutter button, and my aperture button is my back button. But this is where you could go in and change all of that around. AV, TV, rotate, no. Function ring, no. Lock parts. What lock operation parts? I get asked about this all the time. When I was shooting with the San Jose Sharks as their team photographer, I would shoot on these strobe sets that were very powerful Speedotron strobes mounted in our SAP arena. I'm sure if you've been to any NBA basketball, college basketball, hockey, you see the strobes going off in the rafters. So I have to, there's set exposures. We have to set the sync speed at 1/250th, and then whatever we metered the ice at, I think ours was f6.3 constant, and that's constant all over the ice. I don't want to bump those during the game, like my shutter accidentally or my aperture. And so when I go in and turn this off, it locks all my settings so I can't accidentally bump something. We used to, before this setting, we used to gaffer tape. You'd always see pros gaffer tape all their buttons off on their cameras. Like, what are they doing that for? Well, that's why. They didn't want to accidentally bump a setting. So that's where that is really useful if you're doing that type of photography. Here's where you come in and set up your touch operation, screen accessibility. I don't use that. Finder monitor, I set mine to auto. So it's always on the back of my camera LCD screen, but as I move my eye up to the viewfinder, it will shut off the back of my finder and put my, just turn on the finder or the monitor inside. So if you're doing night photography, you want to turn that off, and that's where you would go in. Right now I have it set to monitor. Monitor brightness, always just leave this one alone, please. I see people in the workshop and they think this is how they brighten a picture up out in the field. And no, all it's doing is brightening your monitor. So leave that at manual. I know people like to bump it up because they shoot in the middle of the day, but it's going to give you a false read as to what that picture looks like. If you know that and you accept that, that's great. That's great. But just know that it's not corresponding to what's recording on your card. Viewfinder magnification, I leave it standard. And finder rate, I turn mine to high. So if you turn it to standard, you're going to get a little less quality, but you're going to save on your battery rate or your battery. But if always carry spare batteries. I want to see. It's one of the things I love about Sony. These finders are so beautiful. It's like looking at your picture. I always look at Playback and I shut down my non-shooting eye, and it's like looking at a mini computer. I can just see things and know I've got it. Nothing on there. This is where you would go into if you don't want your camera turning off on you. These are, again, sound option for video. USB connection mode, that's where you go. I had to go in and turn that to make sure I could do this video. External output, I had to go into HDMI because I'm patching in to my Mac Studio through a special switch that's taking HDMI. Here's one that I really use, and this is in my menu, and that's your anti-dust function. This is where when shutter is powered off, you want that. It vibrates the camera sensor to shake dust off. And or if you're going into sensor cleaning, this is how you would get your shutter to lock up. Always do this. I know that there isn't a shutter that you have to physically open, but if the power was to cut while you were cleaning your sensor, the shutter could release on you. So I always just make sure I come through when I don't do any type of, if I'm doing a wet cleaning, that I go into sensor cleaning. Auto pixel mapping, I'm not sure really what that does. I leave it on because I think by default it was on. Here's where you check your version of your firmware. And it's not showing it to me right now, but it would show. I believe this is version 1. I checked it the other day, but probably because I'm doing a screen recording, it's not. I don't know why that went in. Oh, there it is. I hit the wrong button. Yeah, it's version 1. If they came out with, let's say, a version 0.01 or something, that software update button would light. And privacy notice, I don't worry about that right now. So that's it. That's how I set up my Sony a7RV for still landscape photography. I like recording these as much as, for 2 reasons. I get a lot of people in our workshop asking, can I set up the camera for them? Well, you saw how long this video is, and now I can just refer them to the link to this video. And it's something where if I forget something, I can go back and go, gosh, how do I do this? Again, there's so much to these cameras. So I think that's it, and I hope this has helped you out. If you have any questions, just leave them on the bottom of the comment box below, and I will try to get back to you. I'm going to be gone most of the month of March, teaching at Big Sur and then over to the Lofoten Islands in Norway, which is a great workshop. Check out all our workshops. My website is www.donsmithphotography.com. And just click on the links on the homepage. One of them is for workshops, and then each individual workshop, we have a thumbnail, and you click on that, all the information on the workshop comes up. Okay, guys and girls, I hope this helped you out. And until next time, you take care.
Cause I've got something to see. You go and hold me just to show me that you're worthy of me. I kinda like this side of you that's walking away. I like the picture of your Polaroid, babe. If I can fit you, then I fit you where you know you wanna kick it. Wait a minute, turn around to see me in it.